Hey y'all, this is Pastor Keith for Trinity Chapel Charlotte, coming to you today with our next lesson in our ongoing shorter catechism series, Walking Through Westminster. I want to thank you for joining with me today. Today we look at question 17 of the Westminster Shorter Catechism. And question 17 asks, into what estate did the fall bring mankind? And the answer, the fall brought mankind into an estate of sin and misery. If you've been following along with these studies as we've been going through them, up to this point, we've seen how man, Adam and Eve, were originally created in a state of righteousness and knowledge and holiness. They were created in a state of innocence, but by their sin, they fell away from that original estate. And the question today, question 17, asks, where did they fall? Into what estate did they fall when they fell away from that original state? It occurred to me in preparing and thinking about this question that a fall, the damage that a fall can do is greatly dependent on where you land. Falling into a big pile of pillows is much more pleasant than falling into a big pile of needles or nails or something like that. One can do a great deal of damage and the other does not do nearly so much damage. So the question today is essentially, where did we fall? What did we fall into when we fell away from that original estate? And the answer is that we fell into a place of sin and misery. So really what we get at with this, and the next two questions are going to really spell out the two distinctions there between the sinfulness of that estate in which we fell and the misery of the estate in which we fell. But what I want us to see today, just very basically from this question, is that what has happened because of sin, because of the fall, is that we have fallen away from a place where we can obey God and love God, and we've fallen away from a place where we can be happy in God. We've fallen into this estate not just of sin, but also of misery. There's some people that when they paint Christians, especially you think of like Hollywood movies or TV shows, something like that, when they want to portray Christians, religious people in general, but especially Christians, they want to paint a very dour, miserable portrait. I have said that it is unfair to caricature the Puritans as just always very stern and never smiling, always very dour, down, and really not pleasant at all to be around. The reality is that the Bible says that's the state we're in our sin. It's very much like we are, in a sense, addicts. If you've ever known someone who was addicted, to a substance or to pornography or something like that, you know that with an addict, usually they're addicted to this thing and they're not happy in it. But it's this vicious cycle where, they partake of whatever thing they're addicted to. It makes them more miserable than they were before. And then to try and fix the misery, they go back to the substance again. So, if you knew someone who was addicted to, hard drugs or alcohol, something like that, they drink, they get hammered, whatever, they go on the bender, they feel miserable about it because it ruins their life. And in order to solve the misery, they go back to the bottle again. That's the nature of addiction. And that's really what we deal with in our current state. Apart from Christ, we're in this place of a vicious cycle where we sin, we rebel against God, we disobey God. It leads us to really hate ourselves more, and then we're miserable in that. And we think that in order to fix the misery, we should go commit more sin. We should go disobey God some more, and maybe then we will find something to cure the misery of our estate. But this is that vicious cycle where really there's never an answer there. The answer to misery is not more sin, and sin is only going to lead to more misery. That's the estate that we're in. We're very much like an addict in that sense. And so the good news, which we will get into in the next two questions, question 18 and 19, will deal with the sin and then the misery of our state without Christ. But really what I want us to see today is that reality that those two things go together. And the good news then is that when Jesus comes to save his people, he's not just saving them from their sin, but he's also saving them from the misery of their sin. Jesus doesn't just save us from the sin that we've committed and the effects of our sin, but he brings us even out of the misery of our sin so that we can actually have joy. You might think, for example, of the Beatitudes, they're called in Matthew chapter 5, very popular verses. Jesus says, blessed are the meek, blessed are the peacemakers, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. And that word blessed is a Greek word makarios, and roughly it could be translated also to happy, delighted, supremely joyful. The Christian life is not meant to be one of misery. That's the life of sin. The Christian life, the life that Jesus gives us by his grace, is a life of supreme happiness and joy and blessedness. And it's blessedness because we have escaped from that thing that was destroying our lives before, namely our sin and the misery that our sin provided. So again, over the next 2 weeks, we'll deal with question 18 and 19. We'll look into more of the details of the estate that we're in apart from Christ. But that's just the big picture of where do we find ourselves sort of post-Adam, but before Jesus? Where do we find ourselves in between Adam's fall and the redemption that Christ provides? And we find ourselves in this place of sin and misery. But Jesus is coming, and he's going to deliver his people from all of that. So, thank you for joining with me today. I hope this lesson has been encouraging to you, and I pray that God will richly bless you this week to walk in such a way that you can escape the sin and the misery that original nature brought to us, and walk following after Christ, who saves us from these things. This is Pastor Keith for Trinity Chapel. Thank you for joining with me today, and may God richly bless you this coming week.